Hi there. In this short video, I'll introduce you to the Risk of Groundwater Pollution Assessment tool and explain how to use it in any given context. The tool is embedded in the SFD graphic generator and is an important part of the SFD process. So let's take a look at the tool and find out how it works. As you can see, I'm already on the SFD web portal homepage. And I'm going to click on the graphic generator button to open it, and then click Start New Graphic. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this part of the process, and that the first step is to fill in the city information, and then select systems using the selection grid. You do this by hovering over the system you want to select, and then clicking it. Instructions are given in the information button, which also highlights that for some system the risk of groundwater pollution must be taken into account. And these are the split cells on the selection grid, with the transparent text indicating significant risks of groundwater pollution in the top half cell and low risk of groundwater pollution in the bottom half cell. When you select the significant risk cells, they turn blue. When you select the low risk bottom cells underneath, they turn yellow. This is simply to indicate which ones you've selected. The idea is that, for instance, in a location where there are septic tanks with soak pits and it's estimated that there may be a significant risk of groundwater pollution, you choose the top half cell. Conversely, if there's estimated to be a low risk of groundwater pollution where there are pits, for instance, then you choose the bottom half cell and it turns yellow. This is the link to the Risk of Groundwater Pollution Assessment tool, which can be used to estimate whether the risk in any location is low or significant. But before that, I'm looking at that tool, I think we should clarify why only these 12 cells on the selection grid are split and what difference it makes on the SFD that you finally produce when you select one of these split cells. To do that, let's take a look at this other version of the selection grid. As you can see, all the systems on the grid are classified for safe management under one of three categories: C for contained, NC for not contained, or C/NC. Assessing safe management at the toilet is challenging and depends on a range of behavioural issues, including cleaning of facilities and hand washing. For this reason, at this first step of the SFD process, the terms contained or not contained are used rather than safe or unsafe management. Contained systems are those which are unlikely to result in pathogen transmission to the user or the general public in the absence of any other adverse behaviour. These are then shown as the green arrows on the SFD graphic. By contrast, systems described as not contained result in an elevated risk of exposure to pathogens in the nearby population, irrespective of household habits such as hand washing, and are shown therefore as the red arrows on the SFD graphic. For example, these sewer-connected systems with the letter C are always contained, because excreta within a sealed and impermeable sewer present a low public health risks. And these systems are always not contained, either because they are broken, flooded or damaged, or, as in these systems, because they discharge supernatant or liquid effluent directly to the environment. This includes any kind of tank connected directly to open drains, water bodies, or to the open ground. and which will therefore result in a high risk of population exposure to pathogens. The remaining 12 systems, here, here and here, are the split cells and are designated as contained, not contained, because these are systems where some fraction of the excreta infiltrate to the ground and include systems like these ones with lined or unlined pits, tanks with open bottoms, or tanks with a soak pit or leach field. These systems are assumed to be contained unless their use results in a significant risk of polluting groundwater which is used for drinking by people in a nearby vicinity. So how do we determine whether the risk is low or significant, and therefore whether or not the system is contained or not contained, and therefore whether the arrows on the SFD will be green or red? This is where the tool comes in and can be used to estimate the level of risk. So let's open the tool and take a look at how it works. So I'll go back to the graphic generator and open the risk of groundwater tool, assessment tool. The level of risk is determined by an assessment of the context and dependent on the user response to the questions in these 4 topic areas. We can see these if we just enlarge this diagram, as they're represented here. They include the rock type in the unsaturated zone, the depth to the water table, the distance between the technology and the groundwater source, which is used for drinking, the proportion of the population using the groundwater for drinking, and the type of groundwater production technology. The tool follows and is based on available literature and research, including assessing the risks of groundwater from on-site sanitation, otherwise known as the Argos manual. For each question, users select appropriate responses from the drop-down lists provided. And if I change some of these responses, you can see that the overall risk at the bottom here has changed as well. As a bit of background, this simple decision matrix is used to compute the overall risk level. This plots the proportion of drinking water produced from groundwater and the water production technology against the answers to topic 1 on aquifer vulnerability and topic 2 on lateral separation. Importantly, this recognises that there is often a relatively low risk of groundwater pollution. For instance, where groundwater tables are deep below ground and where the majority of on-site sanitation technologies are remote from groundwater sources used for drinking, or where the proportion of drinking water from groundwater sources are low. In contrast, where these parameters are met and where the groundwater tables are shallow, the unsaturated zone is made up of coarse sand, gravels or fissured rock, and or many on-site toilets are located less than 10 metres from drinking water sources, then the tool responds that there is considered to be a significant risk of groundwater pollution. But it's very important to highlight here that in many cases it can be cheaper to retain the benefits of affordable on-site sanitation and improve the drinking water supply than to consider alternative forms of sanitation with the intent of protecting the groundwater. In the majority of cases, as this matrix shows, there need not be a conflict between on-site sanitation and groundwater quality. In most cases, where appropriate separation between the on-site sanitation technology and the water used for drinking water can be maintained, and especially if the bottom of the latrine pit or soak pit can be kept above the water table, groundwater contamination by on-site sanitation need not be a serious concern. So let's demonstrate some of these, the matrix by an example. Let's assume we have fine sand, silt or clay. The depth of the groundwater table is 5 to 10 metres. And we'll go with some unprotected boreholes, dug wells or springs. And even though over 25% of drinking water is produced from groundwater sources, the tool takes into account all the other parameters to produce an overall risk of low. But having determined the overall risk, what should the user do next? Well, we can return to the selection grid and, for example, go back to our example of septic tanks with soak pits, and because the overall risk of groundwater pollution is low, we can choose the lower cell. And maybe there are some pit latrines in this same location, so again, as the groundwater pollution risk is low, I'm going to choose the lower half of the cell. Then I'm going to create a matrix for these systems, and that automatically populates a matrix with the two systems, and I can put in some numbers for the population, the proportion of the population, and draw an SFD graphic. And this shows that because the systems we selected have a low risk of groundwater pollution, the arrow is green, indicating the content of these pits is contained. Of course, if further investigations revealed that the groundwater table in some areas is less than 5 metres deep, and there's maybe some pit latrines in that area, then we could go back to our groundwater tool, adjust the data, and you'll immediately see that the overall risk because of this change has now gone to significant. So I can use that information, return to my selection grid, and we know that there's some pit latrines in that area, so I'm going to choose the significant risk half cell. I'm going to update the matrix, and now it's added in that new system. So I can maybe split those as a 50-50 split between the pit latrines in the low risk and the 50% in the significant risk, and then I'm going to draw my SFD graphic again. And now we have a second red arrow here representing the 25% of the population using the unlined pits in the area where the groundwater table is shallow, and indicating the red arrow indicating that the content of these pits is not contained. And of course you can use this tool as many times as you like, depending on the different contexts in your city, the different systems, and the data that you have available. So I hope that helps improve your understanding of the risk of groundwater pollution assessment tool. Of course, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to get in touch. In the meantime, thanks for listening and all the best.